Staying in eastern Iowa, multiple boats are severely damaged after a fire broke out at the American Marina in Duke Saturday morning. This is actually asking about $250,000 in general. Walk down almost any marina in America and you will see them. Boats that cost $200,000 brand new, sitting dead in their slips, holes strewn with water. Thousands of them are rotting like this, and the number climbs higher every month. Their owners did not lose them in a storm or to bad luck. So it is people that love to fish for a living. These are anglers. These are people that get out on their boats with their family. They walked away on purpose. And the reason they walked is so upside down that once you understand it, you will never look at a boat the same way again. The real reason these boats are rotting is shocking. The forever material. To understand how a six-figure dream turns into something nobody will take for free, you have to go back about 60 years to a single choice, the entire boating world made without ever realizing what it was choosing. Before that choice, if you wanted to be on the water, you needed wood. And the wooden boat was not really a possession so much as a second job. The wood swelled in the wet and shrank in the dry. It rotted quietly from the inside if you turned your back on it for a single season. It needed constant sanding, caulking and painting every single year, music without fail. Boats were slow to build and brutal to keep alive. And that one hard fact kept them out of reach for almost everybody. For centuries, being on the water belonged to the wealthy and to the working fishermen who had no other choice. With people that couldn't get boats last year still trying to find them, dealers trying to catch up, manufacturers trying to catch up. So it's ended up being the ordinary middle-class family could never have kept one running. Then in the 1960s, builders cracked the problem that had limited boats since the beginning. They figured out how to mold an entire hull out of fiberglass. You laid the glass cloth into a mold. You saturated it with liquid resin. And when it cured, you pulled out a single seamless shell that was cheap, light, strong, and almost impossible to break. There was no plank to rot, no seam to leak, no yearly ritual of scraping and sealing just to keep the water out. And because the whole came out of a mold, a factory could turn out one finished boat after another after another. The way a bakery turns out bread, the cost of getting on the water collapsed almost overnight. That was the moment everything changed. For the first time in human history, a school teacher or a plumber or a retired postal worker could actually afford a boat. Not a rich man's yacht, not a commercial fishing vessel. Just a normal weekend boat to take the kids out on a Saturday morning, so they bought them. They bought them by the millions decade after decade until boating stopped being a luxury for the few and became an ordinary part of American life. Today there are roughly 12 million registered boats in the United States. And almost every single one of them is made of fiberglass. These are just two of them. And these are just the two that are still remaining above water. The other three are underwater over here in these slips under the dock. That number is the entire modern boating world standing on top of one cheap and miraculous material. But here's the thing nobody stopped to think about back then. The quiet flaw buried right inside the miracle. They had just built a material that lasts almost forever. And then they turned around and sold it to people who do not. A well-kept fiberglass hull can survive 50 years without much trouble. Even 60. It can outlast the loan that bought it. It can outlast the marriage that paid for it. In an enormous number of cases, it simply outlasts the owner. And when that owner finally passes away, music, or gets too old and too stiff to climb aboard, or just quietly runs out of the money it takes to keep the thing afloat, the boat does not go anywhere at all. It does not break down. It does not disappear. It just sits there in its slip perfectly intact, bobbing in the water and waiting for the exact moment it stops being one person's pride and becomes somebody else's enormous problem. The owners stop paying. They stop answering the phone. And one day, they just walk away. No floor. Now, you are probably thinking the same obvious thing almost everyone thinks at this point. So what? Just sell it the way you would sell a car you are finished with. And that thought right there is the exact mix-up sitting at the dead center of this whole mess. People buy boats the way they buy cars. You buy it, you enjoy it for a few years, and when the thrill fades, or the budget gets tight, you trade it in, or sell it off. The entire industry was built and sold on that comfortable promise, but a boat is not a car. And the difference between the two of them is the whole story. When a car finally reaches the end of the road, it still has a floor underneath its value. Even a complete junker, an engine seized solid, a frame eaten through with rust, is still worth a few hundred in raw scrap steel. A salvage yard will gladly take it off your hands, crush it flat, melt it down, and sell that metal right back into the world to become a refrigerator or a beam or another car. Steel is a commodity. There is always a buyer waiting at the very bottom. You cannot see that floor when you sign the papers in the showroom, but it sits underneath you the entire time, quietly protecting every car owner in the country from ever being truly stuck with a worthless object. A fiberglass boat has no floor, none at all. When a fiberglass hull reaches the end of its life, the material it is made of is worth essentially nothing to anyone. You cannot melt it down because unlike a plastic bottle, it was never designed to soften and reflow. The resin is cured hard and permanent with glass fiber locked inside it, and once it sets for good. You cannot sell the glass, it will not rust into anything useful. It will not rot away into the soil. And it will not break down in any landfill on Earth inside your lifetime or your children's, or most likely your grandchildren's either. The stuff was specifically engineered to shrug off years of pounding in the open ocean. And it does its job perfectly long after a single human being on the planet wants it around. So instead of gently coming to rest on a floor, the value of an old fiberglass boat just keeps falling. It falls straight through zero and right on down below it into territory where the thing you own is worth less than nothing because it costs you real money just to be rid of it. And the moment a boat crosses that line, the math flips on the owner in a way that changes absolutely everything about the decision sitting in front of them. But even the negative value was not the part that finally made people furious. The part that made people furious was discovering exactly what it costs to make one of these boats simply disappear. The real numbers. Here are the actual figures. Because this is the point where it stops being talk and starts being a bill with your name on it. Getting rid of a worn-out boat runs somewhere around $95 to $100 a ton, or roughly $5 for every foot of length. On its own, that does not sound like much at all, but that is only the entry fee. On top of it, you pay to haul the boat out of the water with a crane or a lift. You pay again to truck the thing across town to a landfill that will actually accept it. And if the boat is already sunk down in its slip, which a startling number of them quietly do, you pay thousands of dollars more just to raise it off the bottom before any of the rest of it can even begin. The charges stack one on top of another until a free boat has somehow cost you more than a used car. If this is already making you see the water differently, do me one small favor and tap subscribe before you forget. I dig into the real money side of boating every single week. The part the dealers and the brokers will never put on a glossy brochure. And the part that comes next is the one that quietly drains people's bank accounts the most. To see just how upside down this gets. Look at one boat recycler operating out of Houston, Texas. When the time came to move his business to a new location, he found himself with around 200 old holes and nowhere on earth to put them. So he went looking, calling around for somewhere, anywhere that would take the fiberglass off his hands. And he could not find a single place that would accept it, not one. In the end, he did the only thing left to do. He paid straight out of his own pocket to make them go away. And it cost him roughly $40,000 to dump tons of whole material into a landfill. And he did look into doing it the right way first. There's a machine out there that can grind fiberglass down into fibers and powder that could in theory be reused for something useful. The machine costs around $100,000 to buy. But the market for recycled fiberglass is so tiny and the price it fetched is so low that the moment he ran the numbers, the whole idea collapsed. He would have spent $100,000 to produce a material that almost nobody actually wanted. He was genuinely measurably better off paying to throw the stuff into a hole in the ground. Read that again and let it land. The responsible choice was the one that lost the most money by a wide margin. And if you are sitting there wondering how on earth that can be the smart, legal, sensible outcome, you are in very good company because so is everyone who has ever looked at this industry closely. Walk away math. Now stop being the recycler for a second and picture that you were the owner instead. Your boat is 25 years old. The engine needs serious work. The gel coat is chalked and cracked and shot. And every broker at the marina takes one look at it and will not offer you a single dime. To get rid of it the right way, the legal and responsible way, it's going to cost you a few $1,000s straight out of your own pocket for a thing you can no longer use and that nobody on earth wants. Or you could simply stop answering the marina office when they call. You could quietly stop paying your slip fee, and you could let the boat slide from being your problem into being their problem instead. Here's the part that turns music. This from a sad little story into a national one. In a great many states, the punishment for doing exactly that is so small it is almost an insult. In Virginia, the fine for abandoning a boat without permission is $500. That is not a typo, and it is worth sitting with for a second. The penalty for walking away is frequently smaller, sometimes far smaller, than the cost of disposing of the boat the right way would ever have been. So put yourself honestly in those shoes. The responsible music choice costs you thousands of dollars and leaves you holding nothing. The irresponsible choice costs you a few hundred at the very worst, and very often costs you nothing at all because music. No one even comes looking. What does a normal person do when the math is laid out plainly in front of them? They do exactly what you would do. They walk. The system as it is built today does not merely allow them to walk away. It practically pays them to. Music. And every owner who walks leaves one more hole behind for somebody else. Which is how a slow trickle turns into something far bigger than a few empty slips at the end of a quiet dock. The perfect storm. For a long stretch of years, this music stayed a slow trickle. A boat here, a boat there, mostly tired old wooden vessels left over from decades past. It was a nuisance that marina owners grumbled about, not a crisis anyone lost sleep over. That did not last because two enormous things happened at almost exactly the same time. And together they turned that trickle into a flood. The first was the pandemic boom. You remember it. Lockdowns hit, and all at once everybody on Earth wanted to get outside and away from other people. And the boat was the perfect escape pod for a family that could not go anywhere else. The boating market shot straight up like a rocket. New boats were backordered for a year or more. Used boats sold for whatever the seller felt like asking that morning. People were paying over sticker price for a basic pontoon and counting themselves lucky. It was a full-blown frenzy music, the kind of buying where common sense quietly slips out the back door. And then the rush ended the way every rush in history has ended. People had convinced themselves they understood exactly what their new boat was worth and what it would always be worth. They were wrong. Interest rates climbed. Music, fuel got painfully expensive. And that gleaming thing they had bought on a whim during the strangest year of their lives started to feel heavier and more foolish with every monthly payment. The market that had been red hot went stone cold, and it went cold fast. Look at the numbers, and the chill is impossible to miss. Through the first half of 2025, New power boat sales in the United States were down close to 10% from the year before. Pontoons were down almost 11%, jet boats dropped more than 14%, stern dry boats fell a brutal 20%. The used market sagged right along with them, sliding around 10% off its high. Everybody who paid top dollar in the frenzy of 2021 went to sell in the cold of 2025 and learned the hard way what a boat is truly worth once all the hype has finally drained out of it. And here is the second thing, the quiet one that is making all of it so much worse. The big shipyards are pumping out brand new models faster than they ever have in history. Group Bento, the maker behind the well-known Bento and Jono lines, rolled out 66 new models in just 3 years. That is a 50% jump over the pace before. If you are walking into the showroom with cash in hand, that sounds wonderful. But if you are trying to sell an older boat, it is a quiet disaster because a perfectly good 10 or 15-year-old boat now looks downright ancient, parked next to all that new design. Even when it is in flawless mechanical shape, a buyer glances at the dated dash, the old layout, the styling that screams of another decade, and they simply keep walking toward the new ones. A fair ordinary drop in value on a lot of these boats would be 30% or more, and the truly old ones blow right past that figure on their long slide toward zero. But even when a seller somehow finds a buyer willing to look past the dated style, there is a wall waiting just behind that buyer. A wall most sellers never see coming until it has already crushed the deal. 3 walls. The first wall is the loan. Boat loan rates have climbed sharply, with the average new boat loan reported to be sitting around 8.5% in 2024, up from under 6% just 2 years before. That alone cools a lot of would-be buyers right where they stand. But the real killer is hiding underneath it. Most boat lenders flatly refuse to write a loan on a hull older than 15, maybe 20 years. So your 25-year-old cruiser is not merely expensive to finance. It is often impossible to finance at all. The buyer who genuinely wants it cannot get a single bank to lend against it. So they would have to pay the entire price in cash. And most people in that price range simply do not have that cash sitting around. So the deal dies before it ever starts. The second wall is the insurance. And this is the one that quietly broke the market for older boats more than anything else on this list. Insurers have grown harsh, almost ruthless on older vessels, and they are hardest of all anywhere near hurricane country. In states like Florida, Texas, and Louisiana, the big companies now demand a written hurricane haul-out plan before they will even hand you a price. And the prices in those waters have, by some reports, jumped around 30%. For a boat that is genuinely old, a lot of insurers will not even play the game at all. They just say no. No plan, no price, no coverage at any number you can name. And a boat that nobody will insure is a boat that almost nobody can responsibly buy, no matter how badly they might want it. The third wall is the inspection, and this is where the deal usually dies for good. Any serious buyer is going to pay a marine surveyor to crawl through every inch of that boat before they close. On a 30-year-old fiberglass hull, that inspection almost always turns up the very same grim list. Water that has crept into the deck and sits trapped there, soft and heavy. Spongy spots underfoot where the structure has quietly begun to give way, bubbling and blistering in the hole below the waterline. An engine wheezing through its final seasons. The surveyor writes all of it up in cold, honest detail. The buyer's loan falls through, the insurer backs out, and the whole thing collapses right there on the dock before anyone has a chance to shake hands. Stack those 3 walls one on top of another, the loan, the insurance, and the inspection, and you end up with a boat that is for sale on paper, but completely impossible to sell in real life. That is the quiet, brutal truth, hiding behind a polite little phrase like, nobody will buy it. And the cruelest part of the whole thing is the timing. That very first wave of cheap fiberglass boats, the millions sold to ordinary families back in the 60s and 70s, is reaching the end of its life at the exact moment the used market collapsed beneath it. Every piece had been sliding into place for 60 years. The owners just had no idea what it was all building toward. What leaks out? An abandoned boat does not sit there politely waiting for someone to come and deal with it. It leaks. Most of these hulls still have fuel sitting in the tanks. Oil in the engine, batteries slowly corroding, hydraulic fluid in the lines, and a long, ugly list of chemicals that were never once meant to touch open water. As the boat slumps lower and the hull finally cracks open, all of that begins to bleed out. First into the marina, then into the river, then out into the bay. And the fiberglass itself begins shattering into floating debris that wrecks the propellers of working boats and clogs the very channels that everyone else needs to get safely in and out. This is the point where an abandoned boat stops being an eyesore and turns into a genuine hazard for every other person on the water. And then there are the storms, which take this slow-motion disaster and compress it into a single catastrophic night. One hurricane can create hundreds of wrecks before music, the sun comes back up. When Hurricane Ike tore through Galveston, Texas in 2008, it cost something like $200 million in damage to boats alone. A storm does not gently lower vessels to the bottom at their docks. It rips them off their moorings, hurls them deep into the marshes, drops them on top of one another, and scatters them across the shoreline like toys. Overnight, a county that had a handful of abandoned boats on its hands suddenly has an entire junkyard of them, half sunk and broken open and bleeding into the water. And the owners, on the rare occasion that anyone can even track them down, are very often either badly underinsured or simply long gone. Every big storm season piles more onto a bill that the industry has been quietly refusing to pay for decades, always hoping somebody else would handle it first. The bill comes due. Eventually, the sheer scale of the thing caught up with the people in charge. In 2025, the Botus Foundation, funded by a grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Marine Debris Program, kicked off what was billed as the single largest abandoned boat cleanup in American history. More than 300 abandoned boats were hauled out of coastlines, rivers, and harbors across 5 states, 2 United States territories, and a tribal reservation. And just as importantly, they launched the first national list simply to keep track of where all these forgotten vessels actually are. Because until very recently, nobody even knew the real number. And that matters enormously because you cannot begin to solve a problem you have refused to even count. And these are not little rowboats bobbing around in a quiet pond. Picture a 120 feet former Navy ship that sat abandoned in a South Carolina creek for 4 full years, blocking the waterway and steadily leaking oil into the surrounding marsh, until the only workable fix anyone could come up with was to tow the entire thing 32 miles offshore and deliberately sink it to the bottom as an artificial reef. Read that again and let it land. The official cleanup plan for some of these boats is to take them out to sea and send them straight to the bottom on purpose because there is genuinely no better option left anywhere on the table. The people who study this saw it coming from a long way off. Researchers and boating industry groups have been sounding the alarm since at least the 2000s, warning that the country was sailing straight into an enormous fiberglass disposal problem, that there was no real place to recycle the material, and that there was no plan at all for the millions of boats steadily growing old in their slips. Reports landed on desks, meetings were held, and for the most part, nobody with the actual power to fix it bothered to act. For one simple and very human reason. There was no money in fixing it, and there was real money in looking the other way. And here is the part that should knock the wind out of you. This is nowhere near just an American problem. Over in the European Union, more than 100,000 fiberglass boats reach the end of their lives every single year. Of those, only around 2,000 are actually recycled. 2,000 out of 100,000. The rest are abandoned, dumped, or quietly vanish. And by one estimate, somewhere between 90 and 100,000 boats a year in the European Union alone are simply nowhere to be found, which is a very polite way of saying they ended up somewhere they truly should not have. And somehow it gets larger still. Some estimates put the number of boats nearing the end of their lives around the entire music world at 35 to 40 million. Now, that is a rough guess, and you should take any number that enormous with a healthy grain of salt. But even if it is off by half, even if it is off by far more than half, we are still staring at a tidal wave of scrap fiberglass with absolutely nowhere on earth to go. Not the lazy owner. There's a version of this story you have probably already heard. The lazy owner version, the one where the whole thing is the fault of some careless deadbeat who walked away from his expensive toy. And that version is not the full picture. Not even close. It is easy to stand on the dock and stare at a rotting boat and blame the person who left it there. And sure, a handful of them earn that blame fair and square, but most of the people who walk away from a boat are not villains in this story at all. They are the widow who inherited her late husband's beloved project, boat, and cannot possibly afford the thousands of dollars it would take to scrap it. They are the retiree living on a fixed income whose slip fee, insurance premium, and fuel bill all quietly tripled while their monthly check stayed exactly the same. They are the person who got laid off without warning and suddenly had to choose between the boat payment and the mortgage on the house their family actually lives in. Every one of them was sold a beautiful dream on a car-shaped payment plan. And not one of them was ever told the small devastating detail that this particular dream has no way out at the end. There was no exit printed anywhere on the brochure. The cruel twist. And that is music, the genuinely cruel twist sitting at the very heart of all of this. Every single thing that made fiberglass boats such a runaway hit is exactly the same thing now. Working against everyone who owns one. The incredible toughness that let a family pass a boat down across 3 generations, and 50 years is the very same toughness that makes the whole impossible to get rid of once those 50 years are finally up. The low price that put boating within reach of ordinary working families is the very same low price that left no money set aside anywhere for the inevitable cleanup at the end of the line. The exact qualities that built the entire boom are the qualities quietly drowning the marinas today. So is it all doom and sinking and despair? Not entirely. There are a few real bright spots worth knowing about. Rhode Island ran a pilot program that shredded old fiberglass hulls and actually found a workable way to break the material down into something that could be used again. A small but growing handful of states now offer free drop-off programs where you can hand over a tired old boat before it ever gets the chance to turn into an abandoned wreck in the first place. And that new national list is a genuine step forward because again, you simply cannot fix a problem you refuse to even measure. But let us be honest with ourselves here. These are small programs standing against a very, very big tide, and the basic arithmetic has not changed one bit. Until the day recycling a fiberglass hull finally becomes cheaper than dumping it. The quiet incentive to just walk away is still sitting right there in plain sight, free for the taking for anyone who runs out of other options, who pays the bill. And here is the part most people miss entirely. This lands on far more people than just the boat owners themselves. When a marina fills up with rotting boats, those dead holes take up slips that paying customers can no longer use, which cuts the marina's income and pushes up the cost for everyone still tied up there. When a city is forced to pay to remove an abandoned wreck from its waterfront, that bill lands squarely on taxpayers, many of whom have never set foot on a dock. On the Lynnhaven River in Virginia, volunteers work to pull around 100 abandoned boats out of the water in a single year. On the Anacostia River, federal money cleared 33 of them. Every last one of those is a cost being swallowed by somebody other than the person who first bought the boat and first walked away from it. So the next time the smiling guy at the dock leans over and tells you a boat is a great investment, you might gently push back. Because for an awful lot of people, the most expensive part of owning a boat is not the purchase price, the fuel, or even the slip fee that bleeds them dry every month. It is the day they finally try to get rid of the thing. Which brings us right back to those boats sitting in their slips. The ones strut as we speak. Except now you know the truth about them. They are not sitting there because their owners were careless or cruel or stupid. They are sitting there because the system exactly as it is built today quietly made walking away the single cheapest choice on the table. That in the end is the real reason America's marinas are filling up with boats that nobody on earth will buy. So before you go, do one last thing for me. Hit that subscribe button so the next story like this one finds its way to you. And then tell me down in the comments, knowing everything you now know about the bill waiting at the end. Would you take a free boat if someone offered you one tomorrow? I genuinely want to know where you land on it. And if you want to see exactly how the used boat market got flipped this far upside down, that video is right there waiting on your screen. I will see you in the next one.